Hey guys, welcome to Mrs. Brown's Cooking School at Hope Corner Farm. Today we're going to learn how to make biscuits. Biscuits are a great little quick bread, super easy to make up. It's a great side for soups, especially on a cold day. We love biscuits at our house. They're topped with a little bit of honey. Perfect. So you need to gather a few ingredients before you get started. So let's talk about those things right now, ingredients and utensils. So you are going to need a baking sheet. I also recommend putting parchment paper on your baking sheet. It's going to make cleanup a lot easier if you use it. Do you have to use it? No, but it just makes things a lot better. Remember, parchment paper, not wax paper. There is a big difference there, so make sure it's parchment paper you're using. You're also going to need to use a pastry cutter. We're going to be using this to cut the butter up into tiny little chunks in the flour. We'll show you that here in just a few minutes as well. You need a big bowl for mixing, obviously. You got to have a spoon or a spatula to mix everything together. You're going to need a rolling pin because you're going to roll this dough out. You also need either a biscuit cutter, or if you don't have a fancy biscuit cutter, a glass will work just as well to cut out those biscuits, and I'll show you using that here in just a little bit as well. Now when we talk about ingredients, I have all my ingredients gathered here. It's always a good idea to get those ingredients gathered before you get started. Just makes your life a lot easier so you're not running around the kitchen trying to figure out what you need. So you're going to need 2 cups of all-purpose flour. Again, I like unbleached flour, but all-purpose flour. You need 3/4 of a cup of milk. I'm just using 2% right here. Really, I've made it with every type of milk and it turns out great no matter what kind of milk you use. You need a teaspoon of salt, regular old salt. You need a tablespoon of baking powder, not baking soda, you need baking powder. You need a 1/2 cup of butter that's been softened. And I also have, this is probably about 1/3 of a cup of flour. This is for sprinkling my counter when I go to roll out those biscuits. So I'll bring you close to the action here in a second, but let's do the first step. You make sure you wash your hands at least 20 seconds, and then you got to get your oven preheating to 375 so it's ready when you're ready to put your biscuits in. So let's get that going first. On my oven, I hit bake. Mine starts at 350, so I'm just going to move that temperature up to 375 and hit start. Now that's going to preheat. I'll bring you closer to the action here. Okay, so now we're back over here close to the action. One thing I want to point out before I get started mixing is I have prepared my baking dish by putting a piece of parchment paper on there. I cut it just the size, just a little bit bigger actually, than the size of my baking pan. So now that's all ready to go when I'm ready to put my biscuits onto my baking sheet, okay? So first thing I need to do here, we're going to be using the biscuit mixing method here for quick breads, go figure. And what this method does is it gets the butter incorporated so that you have chunks of butter in the dough. And what happens when that butter melts in the oven, it creates flaky layers, which is what you want for your biscuits. So let's show you how to do this. First thing you got to do here in our bowl is we're going to add our 2 cups of flour. We're going to add our teaspoon of salt. And we're going to add our tablespoon of baking powder. Now I'm going to give this a little stir just to kind of make sure everything's nice and incorporated, evenly mixed. That just helps to distribute that baking powder and that salt evenly throughout your dough. Now, the next thing I need to do here is I'm going to bring my butter in, and I'm just going to pop this right in here. And it's nice and soft. It's in fact not wanting to come out of my dish here, so we'll just pop that in there. And what we're going to do here is we're going to cut this butter into the flour with my pastry cutter. And what does it mean when it says to cut in the butter? Well, let me show you. Literally, you're taking this thing and all these wires are going to cut this butter up into tiny little chunks. So it just kind of looks like this. You're just kind of taking the butter, chopping it up into chunks and getting those little chunks covered up. Whew, I've spilt a little bit, that's okay. We're cooking. Cooking gets a little messy sometimes. As long as you clean it up, it's great. But literally, I'm just, lifting it up and cutting those chunks of butter, or that butter, into little tiny chunks. So that way it's evenly incorporated throughout the dough, and again, you get all those lovely flaky layers in your biscuits. When I'm done, now again, my hands are clean, so I can just kind of wipe this butter off and get it back into that dough there. So this is what it looks like when that butter is cut up in there. If you look closely, you can see little chunks of butter in that dough, and that's perfect. Okay, so now my spoon has a little bit of butter on it too, so I'm just gonna kind of use it to stir a little bit. Now, the last thing we have to do before we start rolling these out is add our milk. So we're just gonna pour our 3/4 cup of milk in here. and we're going to get stirring. And you just stir until you have a dough. Sometimes I kind of have to pat things down a little bit, and it's gonna get thick. It's a dough, remember, that we're gonna roll out onto our counter. Ooh, I'm a messy cook. I will totally admit that. Okay, so you just keep kind of pressing and stirring, and if you want, you can even get in there with your hands, which is what I sometimes do here at the end. I'm gonna get all this dough off my spoon, and I'm just gonna get that flour nice and incorporated in here before we roll it out, move it to the counter and roll it out. Again, you just want to make sure your hands are clean by washing them with soap and warm water for at least 20 seconds. Happy birthday through twice is always a good idea here. So just get that flour, butter into that dough. And so there you go. There is your dough. So I'm going to move here in just a second so we can roll this out, and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so hopefully this angle works here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take that extra flour we had and we're just gonna sprinkle it on the counter. If you don't do this, you're gonna end up with your biscuit dough sticking to that counter, and that's never fun. So then we're gonna grab our biscuit dough out of the bowl and we're just gonna pop it right there. Now, I sometimes like to take my fingers and just sprinkle a pinch on top just to make sure that my dough doesn't stick to my rolling pin. And we're gonna roll it out. Now, like I always tell my students, do not roll this dough too thin. If you roll it too thin, you're gonna have crackers on your hands. You want this dough to be about a 1/2 inch thick. And I'll kind of show you, I use my finger and I just take the joint, the top joint, here we go, and that top joint from this knuckle to the end of my finger is about a 1/2 inch, and that's a good guide for you. So to roll, I always like to go to the 4 corners, so I'm gonna start by going to that corner, pull to this corner, pull to that corner, push to that corner. Again, push, pull, pull, and push. Now again, do not get too thin with this dough. It does not take a lot to roll it out. So I'm gonna come over here, and that dough is pretty close to being right at that knuckle joint right here. So that's perfect. That's how thick we want these to be rolled out. Do not go thinner than that, again, otherwise you're gonna have crackers. Now I'm gonna take my glass and I'm gonna use this and as my cutter. And everybody has glasses at their house, so don't worry if you don't have biscuit cutters. So I take my glass and I'm just gonna cut out my biscuit, and I'm gonna come and I'm gonna set it on my prepared baking sheet. And we're just gonna repeat this process. Get as many cut out as possible, and you want to cut them as close together as possible. Otherwise, you're going to end up having to roll numerous times. You want to use up as much dough as possible the first time you do this. You will have to re-roll at least once. Woo. Okay. But I'm going to keep repeating this process here until I get all my biscuits cut. I got 7 cut from this first round. So I'll take my dough. What happens when you need to re-roll, you just wrap it up, try to grab as little flour as possible, and then I just kind of gently massage that dough back together. I make sure flour's right back there. Put that dough back down. I'm gonna move my glass out. Again, 4 corners. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Okay. Again, it doesn't take long. Now we're gonna cut. Put it on there. Cut. And pop it on there. You might have to rearrange your spacing, just kind of see how things are looking. There's another. I'll probably get 1 more set of cuts out of this before I'm done. Okay, so again, now this dough's probably not as sticky. I don't need to move more dough in the way. I'm gonna kind of gently roll this out. Let's see if we can get 2 pretty ones. No, we'll get 1 pretty one, I guess. So right now I have 11 on my sheet, and I could, if I want, roll this out and cut another pretty one and get 1 last one out of it here. And just cut. And then you can decide what you want to do with those scraps. But now I have 12 biscuits over here on my cookie sheet. And you can, if you want, mash that up and make another one. Totally up to you. But let's show you what this looks like. We'll pop this in the oven here in just a second. Okay, so now we're ready to put these into the oven. Again, my oven's at 375 degrees. It is fully preheated. It is ready to go. These need to cook for 18 to 20 minutes, so you're going to want to set a timer, so I'll show you how to do that here in a minute. But again, I've got my 12 biscuits cut out here, my parchment paper. We're ready to go. So let's open this oven. I stand to the side so that way that heat comes out and doesn't hit me in the face, and then I can move around to the front. So give me a second. Let's open it first. Let that heat come out. Now we can open, and I can kind of move more to the front. And I'm going to carefully put this in my oven. Close it up. Now let's set a timer. 18 minutes, because that's minimum. I always start with the minimum because you can always work up. If you overdo it, it's too late. So 18 minutes, we'll come back and we'll check our biscuits and see if they're ready. All right, our timer's down to about 30 seconds. We'll open it here and check and see if it's ready in just a second. I do have a wire rack here that I'm going to place my baking sheet on so that my biscuits can cool. You can actually just pull these biscuits right off the baking sheet and, you know, enjoy them. They're going to be hot, keep that in mind. So if you do, you're going to want to use a spatula of some sort to pull them off. But we're getting close now. I'm going to put on my oven glove. I love oven gloves, but you can use an oven mitt, pot holder, something to protect your hand, not a towel. All right, so my timer's off. I'm going to hit the timer button so I don't turn off the oven itself. I just hit the timer, not the cancel button. Keep that in mind. Stand to the side, open up my oven, and those look perfect. So 18 minutes was just right this time. So I'm going to gently pull these out, and you can kind of see that beautiful golden look, hopefully. Close my oven here, and I'm going to set these over here, and we can let them cool for about 5-10 minutes if you want, or you can use a spatula, get them off, and put them onto a plate, and they're ready to go. And there it is, your biscuits, a great side dish, especially to soup on a cold day. Have fun making this, you guys.